Trafficking in persons is the violation of a person's human rights, and it has become a global phenomenon affecting the most vulnerable amongst us in both developing and developed countries. Guyana is no exception, and following years of neglect by the previous administration, the scourge was allowed to fester. However, the APNU-AFC coalition government, following its assumption to office in May 2015, implemented measures to effectively and efficiently tackle the issue, which has led to the country improving its ranking to Tier 1 on the TIP watch list. Welcome to Government in Action. On this edition, we take a closer look at what the government of Guyana is doing to not only reduce but eradicate human trafficking from Guyana from the legislative, national security, and social protection angles.
Trafficking in persons, TIP, or human trafficking involves the recruitment, transport, transfer, or harboring of persons using threat, force, or other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, or the abuse of power or position of vulnerability of another person for the purpose of exploitation, sexual or otherwise. It involves the exchange of payments or benefits. President David Granger, speaking at the launch of the National Plan of Action for the Prevention and Response to Trafficking in Persons 2017-2018 on January 18, 2017, acknowledged that trafficking in persons is a serious crime and a violation of human rights. The head of state described it as a crime against humanity, which constitutes a form of modern-day slavery. He said it is an affront to civilized society, denial of human rights, particularly of freedom from human servitude.
I recall that as leader of the opposition in the National Assembly, I brought a motion on Wednesday the 22nd of May, 2013, 4 years ago, calling for the establishment of a commission of inquiry to investigate the crime of trafficking in persons. I urged the government of the day to lift the veil on trafficking in persons and to stop denying that the crime was taking place, denying that it needed to be eliminated. I added then that denial of the existence of trafficking in persons in Guyana makes matters worse, and I quote, "There's a syndrome of dodging the problem and pretending that the persons who are being trafficked have voluntarily entered into a state of prostitution." I told the National Assembly then that trafficking in persons was a form of modern-day slavery. I warned that trafficking was a crime of international jurisdiction and culprits could be prosecuted for it in any part of the world. That motion, titled Appointment of a Commission of Inquiry to Investigate the Incidents of Trafficking in Persons in Guyana, was approved by the National Assembly. But to our country's shame, it was never assented to and it was never implemented by the national president at the time.
President Granger said this change was to emphasize the state's responsibility for the protection of its vulnerable citizens and the security of the public. Both ministries, he noted, are in the forefront of the struggle to ensure that trafficking in persons is eliminated. The National Plan of Action Against Human Trafficking was deemed by President Granger as his government's response to the need for the effective enforcement of the laws prohibiting trafficking in persons. He said human trafficking must be confronted fearlessly, frontally, and fully, with the legal framework being backed by the Plan of Action, which is aimed at eventually eliminating trafficking in Guyana. The head of state said the previous administration's efforts to combat trafficking in persons often reflected the notorious indifference of indecisiveness to the crime. The seriousness of the crime, he noted, was de-emphasized with few efforts made to combat trafficking in a systematic way.
Making reference to the annual dossier issued by the United States Department of State's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, which reports on trafficking in persons around the world, President Granger said the past government had failed to implement the report's recommendations.
It has denied the validity of the reports, disparaged its findings, and dismissed them. My sense of decency prevents me from repeating some of the language used to describe previous issues of the report. The government of Guyana today is solving the problem, not suppressing bad news. We are successfully prosecuting traffickers. We are collaborating with counter-trafficking non-governmental organizations, international organizations, and friendly countries. We are strengthening the interministerial coordination of our efforts.
Following the release of the United States Department of State's 2017 Trafficking in Persons TIP report, which was released on June 27, 2017, announcing Guyana's reclassification to Tier 1 after being placed at Tier 2 for 3 consecutive years, Minister of Social Protection Ms. Amna Ali said that this classification is testament to the hard work that the government has been doing to de-link Guyana from the notoriety associated with being a known source and destination country for which men, women and children are subjected to sex trafficking and forced labor. The work of the government, particularly the Ministry of Social Protection, has resulted in Guyana being placed in the bracket of countries that fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking, making it only the second Caribbean country to reach this milestone. A critical aspect of the fight would be capacity building through training, which is a requisite feature of the Social Protection Ministry in accordance with its TIP action plan. Close collaboration with the Guyana Police Force and medical practitioners, in addition to sensitization campaigns in the 10 administrative regions. The minister is optimistic that public awareness, established relationships with community leaders, and collaboration with major stakeholders will lead to the elimination of human trafficking in Guyana.
The previous administration, I would believe, did not place emphasis on human lives and human development. And we found that many of the people, maybe they weren't cooperating with the previous administration, but we find that they are more open to speak with us. They welcome the raids that we have been carrying out in various communities and so on. And so our program, on a daily basis, though difficult, we intensified them. And we found that from 2015 to now, the numbers in these cases reduces.
In 2016, there were approximately 59 identified alleged victims, with that number increasing to 98 this year. And with support from the Countering of TIP Department, these persons have received the counseling and assistance they need to move on with their lives. For this year, there have been 3 cases with 2 convictions, 1 person found guilty and is currently serving 3 years imprisonment and restitution of $100,000, and the second conviction, $100,000 restitution to the victim. Unfortunately, the ministry lost one of the cases due to insufficient evidence. In its recommendations, this year's report called on the government to fund specialized victim services, vigorously investigate and prosecute sex and labor trafficking cases, impose more stringent sentences, training for law enforcement, judiciary officials and frontline responders, finalize the written identification procedures to better guide law enforcement officials, provide additional protection for victims, and provide training for diplomatic personnel on human trafficking.
They are excellent recommendations, and we propose to adhere vigorously to make sure that we address this question of trafficking in persons in a big way. Our investigations will have to be improved, and that is why we are having so many training programs. That is why we are looking at various categories of people.
The previous government failed to convict anyone for this crime. Progress on the prosecution of criminal cases were at snail's pace due to the backlog of cases and incorrectly filed paperwork, among other factors, including inadequate attention at the state level to tackle the scourge and allegations of bribery for rulings in favor of traffickers. During that era, there was limited public awareness on the existence of the problem in Guyana, despite global statistics indicating that over 30 million persons are enslaved every year in the cycle of exploitation. In that decade preceding the APNU-AFC coalition government, the PPP administration failed to meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking in persons in Guyana, even with the existence of the anti-human trafficking law. Following the release of the TIP report, Minister Valdo Lawrence, who held the portfolio of Minister of Social Protection in 2015, said the recommendations are all on the government's agenda to combat frontally the issue of human trafficking.
We came in, we built the section, we got the task force going, we came up with an action plan, and so we're working towards that. It's a work in progress. We started off where we were on Tier 2, and we went to Tier 2 watch list. Today we're on Tier 1. It tells you that the government is doing what it is mandated to do, and that is to protect its citizens. We haven't been able to accomplish everything, but we believe that our focus and the plan which we have will certainly get us there.
Minister Lawrence said the coalition government, recognizing and acknowledging the existence of TIP from within and outside the country, sought not only to increase the number of requisite personnel in the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Department, but to build partnerships, giving further credence to the sentiments expressed by Minister Ali.
The second thing we sought to do was to work with the NGOs. And the MOU, as you know, was signed with the Sisters of Mercy so that we can have a place for the victims where they can be protected, where we can be able to help them to get their lives back together, to move forward. So we have been trying to meet the minimum standards. The task force then kicked in, and as you know, the task force comprised of several organizations and ministries. And if you note that the task force which we have is not just a task force with representatives, but you have the Minister of Public Security heading that task force, with the Minister of Social Protection, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, and the Minister of Health sitting on that task force. And I think that says quite a lot as to how the Granger administration deals with this matter.
The Ministerial Task Force on Trafficking in Persons of the Ministry of Public Security has held a number of training courses not only for officers handling TIP cases, but for prosecutors, equipping them with the necessary skills to successfully present a trafficking in person case in court. The training enables them to use evidence effectively to prove that perpetrators are guilty. These prosecutions are in line with the Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act No. 2 of 2005, while taking international best practices into consideration. This year's TIP report coming out of the U.S. State Department said that the Interministerial Task Force, which is headed by Minister of Public Security Mr. Kemraj Ramjatan, coordinated a number of successful police operations. It noted that in 2016, the government reported 19 trafficking investigations, 19 prosecutions, and 2 convictions, compared to 15 trafficking investigations, 7 prosecutions, and 1 conviction in 2015, and 7 investigations, 4 prosecutions, and 1 conviction in 2014. The court sentenced 1 convicted trafficker to 3 years imprisonment and required a restitution payment to the victim. It required the second trafficker only to pay restitution, a penalty inconsistent with the law and one that the Anti-Trafficking Task Force appealed. The appeal remained pending at the end of the reporting period. Minister Ali acknowledged that while work is being done in the interior locations, much more needs to be done to sensitize those persons living in remote and indigenous communities. She said the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs, which has representation on the Ministerial Task Force against TIP, has been collaborating with the other agencies to conduct awareness sessions and assist persons who are victims of human trafficking.
Coordinator of the Countering Trafficking in Persons Department, Tanisha Williams-Corbin, speaking with Government in Action, said that the unit has been conducting and will continue to conduct structured awareness sessions with community leaders in the 10 administrative regions to bring greater awareness of what trafficking in persons is and how they, as leaders, can assist the Ministry of Social Protection in the fight against it. A week of activities is on the ministry's calendar in observance of World Day Against Trafficking in Persons on July 30, 2017, including mini exhibitions in key areas such as the Giftland Mall, Linden, and Barticle.
We'll be bringing stakeholders together to talk about how we can improve the services. Also, big on that agenda, we'll be exploring the possibility or the feasibility of how feasible it would be for us to put shelters in other administrative regions, because we are getting some no's, we are getting some yes. So we'll be also be discussing that, and from that, we will be able to determine what's our next steps as it relates to victim support part.
The ministry, as part of its 2017 work program, is meeting with consultants to determine the way forward with its local documentary highlighting the impacts of TIP and raising awareness countrywide. Programs in the schools, distribution of education, paraphernalia on human trafficking continues to be an ongoing feature at the ministerial level. Looking forward, Ms. Williams-Corbin said the TIP unit will be launching a Blaze campaign, which will be focused on primary school students who have not been targeted in previous years.
We were looking at how to bridge the gap between the parents and the children as it relates to TIP. So we'll be having some campaigns focusing on the parents, and we'll be having some campaigns focusing on the children. So what we'll be doing, we'll be looking at key areas as it will be, our stats will be guiding us on the way forward there.
According to the Trafficking in Persons report for 2017, the government of Guyana has increased its law enforcement efforts. The Combating Trafficking of Persons Act of 2005 prohibits all forms of trafficking and prescribes sufficiently stringent penalties ranging from 3 years to life imprisonment. These penalties, it noted, are commensurate with those prescribed for other serious crimes such as rape. The Ministry of Social Protection was the lead agency responsible for coordinating trafficking efforts and overseeing the anti-trafficking unit. And in May 2016, the unit added 3 new officers responsible for planning and executing the unit's site visits and victim extraction exercises.
The government of Guyana is committed to enhancing education and by strengthening enforcement in order to eliminate the scourge of trafficking in persons entirely. The strict enforcement of human trafficking laws, President Granger said, requires action on a wide range of fronts, sensitizing the public to the trafficking of persons and building institutional capacity to enforce the law. Public education, understanding and support are vital to success in eliminating the crime, since according to the head of state, trafficking in persons is not fully or clearly understood by the average citizen and is often confused with backtracking. Hence, the government of Guyana, through the Ministry of Social Protection, with support from other agencies and stakeholders, are working arduously to gradually remove TIP from the country. I am Stacey Carmichael. Join me next week for another edition of Government in Action.